Hey everyone. So sorry I haven't done a video in quite some time. I've just been really busy with a lot of personal stuff as well as getting ready for the holidays, finishing up 2020. And I got some really good news for my book, Fellowship of Suffering. For those of you guys who supported the project in any way, whether it's just watching these videos, praying for me, or donating money, the editing process is done now. It's all paid for, it's all finished. The final copy of the book is ready and available. I'm just moving into the publishing process right now, which should take a couple months and hopefully will be released. And the timing, I believe, is really perfect because for those of you guys who don't know, the whole point of the book is how important and invaluable community is. And especially when it comes to healing from any type of traumatic experience or dealing with any type of mental issue, there is no resource that is greater than having a strong community that's based on understanding, love, and sympathy. And with everything that happened in 2020 being one of the most divisive years that I've seen in my entire life, and for most of you in your entire life, you've seen that, just how destructive and corrosive it is to the human psyche to be isolated and to have so much hate and bile poured out on both sides of the political aisle. To just see how destructive it is to us and how people are acting out in really barbaric and violent ways all over the country is really appalling and really grieving to a lot of us. And that kind of leads me to the point of this video. I was going to get more into my book, but given what's going on politically in the current climate of this country, I thought it'd be really important to address some of these things, give some of my thoughts, and how we could move forward as a country if we're willing to. And because of that, those of you guys who don't know, I'm not a political guy. I'm not super into politics, and I didn't want to use this channel as a time to speak about my political views. I instead wanted it to be a place where people can have dialogue and discussion, specifically about Christian values and specifically about community as a whole. But what I'm instead going to do is I'm going to take my perspective as a marriage counselor and apply it to the political climate that we see ourselves in right now. Now, this is not something that I'm just doing for no reason. There was a guy named Sebastian Junger whose work greatly influenced my thinking, and it also greatly influenced the book that I wrote. And he wrote a book called Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging, talking about some of the similar things that I talk about in my own book, about how important it is to have a strong community and why, especially in Western countries, we don't really have that. And in his book, he does make a comparison between a union of a man and wife and a union of a country as a whole, and what are the signals that that union's in really bad shape and what we can do about it. And listen to his observation. Granted, this is several years ago when democracy and the political aisles were actually a lot more peaceful than they are today. But listen to what he says. He says, "I know what coming back to America from a war zone is like, and as a veteran, I know what that is like as well, because I've done it so many times. First, there's a kind of shock at the comfort and the affluence that we enjoy. But that is followed by a dismal realization that we live in a society that is basically at war with itself. People speak with incredible contempt about, depending on their views, the rich, the poor, the educated, the foreign-born, the president, or even the entire U.S. government. It is a level of contempt that is usually reserved for enemies in wartime, except that is now applied to our fellow citizens. Unlike criticism, contempt is particularly toxic because it assumes a moral superiority in the speaker. Contempt is often directed at people who have been excluded from a group or declared unworthy of its benefits or rights. Contempt is often used by government to provide rhetorical cover for torture or abuse. Contempt is one of 4 behaviors that statistically can predict divorce in married couples. People who speak with contempt for one another will probably not remain together for very long." Now, as a marriage counselor, I could totally resonate with what this guy is saying. When I'm doing a marriage counseling and I'm trying to figure out where the couple is at and how close they are maybe to divorce and what it would take to repair the marriage and to fix it and to put it on better footing, this is one of the things I look at. I don't primarily look at whether or not disagreements or arguments are happening. I don't even look at how passionate those arguments get or how frequent they are. But this is definitely a huge warning and red flag for me as a marriage counselor when I'm trying to figure out and take the temperature of a particular couple. What I mean by that is every healthy couple fights. Fighting and disagreement is something that is completely natural to a marriage. If there is no fighting or disagreement that's happening in a marriage, it doesn't mean you have the perfect marriage. What it means is it means that one side has given up their rights entirely and the other side is completely and totally controlling the other person. If you get 2 people together they're going to have different perspectives. And those differing perspectives and views are going to come in conflict with one another at some point or another. And these disagreements could be on a lot of things. What romance looks like, what love looks like, what communication looks like, how you should raise the kids, how you should treat them, how you should discipline them, right? There's many different perspectives that couples bring into a marriage, and because of that, these come in conflict with one another, and dialogue, discussion, and even argument happens. And as he said, even criticism can happen. And all these things are acceptable. All these things are rational. All these things are normal, and they're not necessarily destructive. When they become destructive is when criticism and disagreement turn into contempt. Now, contempt is a form of putting someone down or even aggression towards an individual as opposed to a disagreement with an idea or a topic. And this is what I mean. So if a couple comes in and they say, hey, we had a disagreement last night, we had a fight last night, I'll say, like, what was the fight about? Now, if the couple's in really bad shape, they'll be like, I don't remember. I don't really remember what the fight is about. And as I dig and I try to figure out what's going on, usually they'll tell me a story like this. They'll say like, okay, well, last night my wife asked me to take out the trash. I went, I started playing video games or something like that. It slipped my mind. I didn't do it. So she came back out and she said, you're so lazy. You never do what I ask. This is so typical of you. You don't listen to me. You don't respect me. You don't ever hear what I'm saying to you. And then the husband responds and he says, this is you. You're always criticizing. I go to work all day. I do all this work. I just want to relax. And you come home and you put all these demands on me and expectations. You don't appreciate any of the things I'm doing. I was going to get around to it. You just had to remind me. You could have said it nicely. You didn't have to cut me down like this, right? And what you realize at a certain point is they're no longer fighting about the issue. What was the issue? The trash, right? And they could have stayed on topic. And the wife could have come out and said, hey, you know what? I asked you to take out the trash. You haven't done it yet. What's up? Like that really hurts my feelings. It makes me feel unheard as a spouse. Why can't you just pay attention to what I'm saying? That would be staying on topic. But instead, they're no longer talking about the issue. They're now assassinating one another's character. They're using the issue as an excuse to attack one another. And that's what you see happening politically. There's always been disagreement within our political system. And there's always been extremists, by the way, who do speak with contempt about the other side. But predominantly in American politics, most people have been moderate, leaning one way or the other. And because of that, they like having conversation and dialogue with the other side. Disagreements are okay, and they find themselves kind of going back and forth on the political aisle. On some issues, they go to the left. On some issues, they go to the right. Because of that, there's not this contempt. There's not looking at the other side and saying, you're evil. Instead, it's just, I disagree with that idea. Or even, I think that idea is evil or destructive for the country, right? There's a big difference between me looking at an idea and saying it's stupid or saying it's destructive, and me looking at an ideology or a side of the political aisle and accusing that aisle of being evil, destructive, or wanting to dismantle democracy itself. And that kind of language has been thrown around very casually by both sides for the past year, and even prior to that. This has been an incredibly divisive year politically, and it continues to heat up and get more and more tense. Now, another interesting thing that I want to bring out is when a couple gets to this place, you're going to see a couple things. The first one is that they stop resolving fights. So when you fight as a couple, the important thing is not that you fight, but it's how you fight and how you finish the fight, right? At some point during the argument, you have to get to a place of mutual understanding where either you compromise, meaning both of you kind of move closer to the center, or one of you convinces the other, right? So the other person says, hey, I see your point, let's do it that way. Or you disagree, but you agree to disagree. You do it agreeably. You say, hey, you know what? I disagree with you. I'm not going to do it that way. But I see your point. I understand where you're coming from, and I respect that perspective. I really do. Maybe we need to talk more about this. Maybe we need to get a third party in here to mediate. I don't know. But you know what? I do respect you. I just really fundamentally disagree with what you're saying, right? That's okay. Those are all healthy ways to resolve fights. An unhealthy way to fight would be to never resolve it. So you fight, it becomes more and more aggressive, you get off topic, you start assassinating one another's character and quality of life, and then you just forget about it. You stop talking about it. Tempers kind of go down for a little bit, and then another fight happens, and what happens? You start recycling fights. You start recycling them over and over and over again. Why? Because you never actually resolved it. That's another thing you're seeing happening politically. How many times, even in the past week, have you seen both sides of the aisle bring up historical precedent for why they think the way they do? They're like, man, this is just like back in 1976. This is just like back in this. The left is always doing this. And then the left looking at the right. This is always what the right does. They've had this racist perspective. They've had this bigoted perspective. They've had this decision that they only want their way and not our way, right? There's always this idea that these fights are not getting resolved. And because of that, they're becoming more destructive, more aggressive, and more frequent. And that's another bad indicator within a marriage. So what does that mean? What I tell couples when they're at that state is I say, look, you're on one trajectory. That is to get divorced. If you do nothing right now, if you just stay in the marriage and you say, we don't want to get a divorce, and you affirm it as many times as you want, you are going to get a divorce. The only other possible option is one of you will become such a dictator in the relationship that you will put down the other side and refuse to give them a voice anymore, which is equally as destructive, if not more so. Now, that is exactly what's happening in the country right now. Both sides, even though they're outwardly calling for unity, they're like, oh, I just want unity. When you really dig underneath it, they don't want unity. They want to disenfranchise the other side. They want to steal their voice away. Now, what that does, if you steal the voice of the opposing side, you don't have a union anymore. You have a dictatorship. You have one side dictating to the other side how they are to think. And you're saying, you can have equal voice as long as you have my voice. That's not democracy. That's not what our founding fathers fought for. And simply not wanting a destruction of the union is not the same as trying to preserve it. Trying to preserve it actually takes concerted effort and actual decision making from the individual. You have to decide to do this because it is hard work. It is much easier to unify two people than it is to reunify two people after a brokenness has occurred within the relationship. Our unity as a nation has been broken, it's been fractured for some time now. I think we're seeing the fruits of it in a little bit more aggressive and noticeable ways, but it's been broken for some time, probably for over a couple decades. And what needs to happen is there needs to be hard work on both sides to repair the damage that's being done. And one of the main things that needs to be said by the individual as well as the politicians and the people we elect into office is a concerted effort to say, I want the other side to have equal voice to mine. The only way to do that is to say, I look at the other side and I disagree with what they say, but I do see them as people. I do see them as being equal to me, and therefore they deserve a voice just like mine. I'm not going to try to steal their voice. I'm not going to try to steal the election. Now, the right now is looking at the left and saying, that's exactly what you're doing. You're stealing our voice. You're taking away our ability to speak. But isn't that exactly what the rioters at the Capitol were trying to do? They were trying to steal the voice of the left, right? We're both doing it. There's no way that one side or the other can say that they're doing it, no one else is doing it. We're both doing it. We are not trying to fix what's been broken. We're trying to make it worse. We're trying to steal the other side's voice and therefore get our way. We want to live in a society that is only about our ideals and not about the ideals shared by others. That's hugely problematic. And let me finish this by saying this. If we're going to reunify and really examine your own heart, do you really want peace with the other side? Do you really want them to have equal voice with you? There's only one rational and legitimate reason that if I'm in marriage counseling, I would recommend that someone divorce, and that's this. If the other spouse, either through their actions or their words, has shown that they are so destructive, so dangerous, so damaging, that to stay married to them would be destructive, hurtful, and even abusive for either one member of the marriage or the children or the family as a whole, that's when you have to break away. The issue with our country, and why that metaphor doesn't really translate, is because while you have abusive people on both sides, that doesn't characterize the entire party. Right? The minority that is, they're loud and they're most aggressive, that don't represent the majority. They are their own people, and we need to be careful about that. Now, I want to end this by using the words of Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King was speaking at a time when the other side that he's trying to speak to contained a lot of racists. They contained a lot of bigots who actually wanted to steal his voice. And in one of his most famous speeches, Loving Your Enemies, which I'll put in the description below, it's well worth your time. In that speech, he says something. He says, love demands a dialogue, whereas hate demands a monologue. In other words, what he's saying is, I am not going to try to steal the voice of my opponents, even if those voices are calling for my segregation and for even my subjugation. I'm still not going to try to steal their voice, because to steal their voice is to do to them exactly what they're trying to do to me. I'm not going to do that. I see the humanity in these people, and therefore I believe that they can change. And it was that belief that actually healed the nation, as opposed to separating it more and more, because people did. I mean, when you look at society today, racism, individual racism, has almost been eradicated. It's not fully eradicated, but it's really taken massive steps forward from when Martin Luther King was speaking in the 60s. And that's incredible. That's amazing. And it all started with this belief that both sides should have equal voice. He never tried to demonize or to silence his opposition. Now, he criticized their ideas and he called them what they were. He said they were flat out evil. However, he never assassinated the character of the people who held that idea. Very Christian in his perspective. Why? Jesus didn't do that to his opponents either. He never looked at the religious and he said, and he was like, you guys are evil, you guys are wicked, you're never going to listen to me, so I'm going to silence you, I'm going to take away your voice. He never did that. And when one of his disciples tried to do that through trying to cut off the ear of the high priest Malchus' servant, what did Jesus say? He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And he healed the ear of the high priest servant. In the same way, the disciples never tried to steal the voice of those who were even persecuting them. They always tried to communicate with them and reach out to these people because they believed in the ability of forgiveness and the ability of reconciliation and restoration of anyone, no matter how far gone they might be. And that's the kind of belief that we're going to have to hold if there's any hope for this country. So I hope that helps you. I hope that gives you a little bit of a perspective of what you need to do as an individual and how this is going to work. It's not enough to just simply say, I want peace, I want unity. That could be a facade. That could be a total misdirection. People can say that, but in reality, what they really want is they want the moral high ground while they subjugate the other side. You need to look at yourself and say, do I honestly want to do the hard work as an individual that's going to require of me to make peace with the other side? Am I going to make those hard steps to try to speak to people on the opposing side with respect and dignity, even if I vehemently oppose their ideas? That's something you have to decide to do. We all have to decide to make those decisions and take that personal responsibility. If we're not willing to do this, our country's going one way, and that is disintegration. In my next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Christian perspective because, hey, when we see the way the wind's going, we see the way people are acting, there's a high probability that most people will not make this hard decision, and therefore our country is going in one direction. And that's scary for a lot of people. And I want to give the perspective of a guy named Jeremiah throughout the Bible and show how what his view of his nation was, even though it was going in that direction, and how his life can be an inspiration for us in the current situation that we're in. But at any rate, continue to pray for this country, continue to pray for its unity, make those hard decisions in your life, and hopefully what we're going to see is a turnaround. And we can always hope for that. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So I look forward to talking to you guys again soon, and yeah, look forward for my next video. Thanks for watching.